So this is a talk about how we learn about voter registration as an American political institution. And how do we do that? We're going to learn about it through survey data. So let's talk about the US voter registration system. So to vote in most American states, you have to register in advance of the election. And if you move, you have to re-register again. So your registration is tied to your address. When you move, though, the government doesn't try to re-register you. Maybe if you go to change your driver's license, you'll be offered a voter registration form. It's like the motor-voter policy. But it's in paper. It's often not convenient. And so for a certain type of voter that has to move a lot, the system is going to be more burdensome. So it requires active effort. You have to get a form, sign it, stamp it, put it in the mail. And this is going to fall on mobile people, particularly young people, more than, say, stable people that are at the same address for long periods of time. And exceptionally problematic is that if you're a new voter, you have to, or a recently moved voter, you have to get your stuff together and register in a relatively low stimulus period before the election. So it's not like the day before you can go and register and vote. You usually have to do it a few weeks in advance of the election. So the data for this paper comes from the 2012 ANES time series study, and we're just using the face-to-face portion. So Simon and I, for another paper, matched it to voter files. We actually went to 3 different voter file vendors. There are commercial voter file vendors that deal with political campaigns and the parties. And so this allows us to see the registration status of these roughly 2,000 ANES respondents. Then we went through the survey and picked out 300 questions of the ANES that we thought might inform us about the differences between registered people and unregistered people. We then coerced these questions into ordinal scales, so 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, etc. And then we're going to look to see what are differences in characteristics or political attitudes between these 2 groups. And in particular, the ANES is a great survey for this because it's long, so we have lots of candidate items. It's face-to-face, so we actually know where this person lives, because that's where our interviewer was interviewing them. And we get a really good match rate. So we have a match rate to voter files among people that gave us a name of 95.5% and 93% overall. So mismatches or missing matches, I don't think are going to be a big problem. Though if you are interested in, we have this other paper that goes into a lot of depth about the matching of these groups. And you can see that at least among people that we find to be registered, this is 76% of the weighted sample population. Basically everything I'm going to tell you today is on the sample weights. 97% of them self-report that they're registered. On the unregistered side, most of them also say that they're registered, but we think this is sort of a desirability bias. So people that are not registered, they're taking this political survey, so they might want to tell the person that they're interested in voting. Sorry, not that they're interested in voting, but they're registered to vote. So our methodology here is we're going to do weighted 2-sample t-tests. We're going to compute a p-value. Then we're going to use this false discovery rate procedure that's very popular in biostatistics to control the number of false positives that we get. So we're making 300 comparisons just by chance. A lot of these are going to be below 0.05. And so to control for this, we're going to use this Benjamini-Hartsburg procedure. Actually, I'll show you this visually in a minute. But basically, it's going to guarantee that in expectation, 5% of our rejections, that is our rejected null hypotheses, are actually false. That is, 5% of our discoveries are actually no results. And we're going to make 2 sets of comparisons. So we're going to look at registered people versus unregistered people. We make 163 rejections here. So more rejections than non-rejections. So they're more different than similar on the items we identify. Then we're going to subset to high political interest only. So the first question on the ANES is, how often you pay attention to politics? And so we say, if you're pay attention to politics all the time or most of the time, we're going to call you high political interest. We make 64 rejections here. And so just as an aside, so when we implement this procedure, we're making rejections for this first group at p less than 0.025 roughly, and for the second group it's at 0.01. If we used a Bonferroni correction, which is much, much more conservative, we'd make many fewer rejections. So it's 1.6 times 10 to the negative 4. So what the procedure looks like is this. So we've, on our x-axis, we've got our p-values ranked from lowest to highest. And then you'll see the p-values on the y. And we only plotted the values from 0 to 0.05, because it's the only p-values that we would actually reject. So there's a bunch of data points to the right, the ones that we plotted, that are just too high. They'll never ever get rejected. And what we do is, so let's look at these orange dots here. We go along and we find when does it cross this line that goes from 0 to 0.05, and we say we're going to reject all the hypotheses to the left. So there's 163 hypotheses here, 64 hypotheses here. And that dotted line at the bottom that's just above 0, that would be the Bonferroni level. So we make about twice as many rejections using this false discovery rate procedure than if we use Bonferroni. Let's talk about some findings. So the voter registration system institutionalizes the exclusions of poor people, mobile people, and young people. And this inequality persists even amongst high political interest people. So these are people that are interested enough in politics that we would think they would want to register to vote, but because of their social situation, don't do so. And so if we want to mitigate this inequality, say by giving these people a registration form, because they are interested enough in voting, eventually they're going to move and they're not going to be registered again. So we think this is like a structural problem with the voter registration system. And then these lead to vast differences in who gets political outreach. So it's like there's big differences in contact. And there's just lots of other differences between these two groups, especially in political attitudes, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. These are some demographic differences between the two groups. So on the left, we have registered voters. On the right, we have unregistered voters. So these are all rejections in our false discovery framework. So they're 9 years younger, they're 6% more likely to be black, they're 8% less likely to be employed. This is a big one. This is really important for our story. 24% less likely to own a home. If you don't own a home, you're probably renting, which means you're moving more often. And we think this is like a big part of the story here. If you're moving, you're falling off the rolls all the time, every time you move. They're also 22% less likely to have any post-secondary education, and they're 16% more likely to identify as working class. So big differences. But there are also big differences on political attitudes. So they're 11% more likely to say that we should adjust to a changing world. So this is like a common survey measure for like people's attitudes towards like the traditional society. It's like correlates with conservatism. 15% more likely to encourage government action and inequality. This is another big one. They're 14% more likely to favor more spending on childcare. And actually, we're so close to 50-50 on this one that if all the unregistered voted, we would have the median voter would support more spending on childcare. So there's actually particular issues in which if the unregistered vote, if everyone voted, this is classic literature and political science, we would see the median voter position change on issues. They're less likely to say that people can be trusted, and in general, we find a lot of evidence that they're just lower social capital in general. They're more likely to say that blacks must try harder to get ahead in society. It's this racial resentment measure. And then, very interestingly, they're 11% more likely to support Barack Obama for president. So obviously, the median voter supported Barack Obama in 2012, but you can imagine in a closer election that these people could be pivotal in the presidential election. Say if like Romney had gotten 48, 47, 46% of the vote. So this is all great, but it's possible that some of these people aren't registered because they're not interested in being registered. Right? So the ANES offers a monetary incentive. Maybe they're just taking the survey for the money. So we're going to say, well, what if you're high politically interested? So what if you say you pay attention to politics all or most of the time? And we still see big differences. So we say that these people are probably interested enough to register to vote, but there's these structural things that are standing in their way, stopping them from doing so. Many of these differences get smaller. A notable exception is blackness. But there's still big differences. And again, homeownership also got bigger. So a 28% difference between the two groups. And a lot of these differences on issues stick around. So even amongst high politically interested people, unregistered are much more liberal than registered people. There's exceptions here. On racial resentment and Obama support, the differences aren't significant. Part of this is because we don't have a lot of power on these people. So there's about 800 people that make it to this subset, and like in weighted terms, we basically have 84 unregistered people. And so you have to have really big differences to detect a statistically significant differences on these issues. But we still make a lot of rejections. So we reject about a fifth of our hypotheses. So what does this mean? Well, it means that residential mobility and registration are closely linked. So we have an institution that requires that you're registered at your current address, and often this requirement falls on, is more, it hurts the registration of some people more than others. So my father's lived in the same house since 1989, and he has been registered to vote at that address since 1989, and that's reflected on the Illinois voter file. I lived in my apartment for 8 months, and it's also reflected in the voter file. And every time I move, I have to re-register, while my dad continues to own his home. So it's much easier for him to stay registered to vote than it is for me. And these mobile people are lower SES and more liberal. I think you've given me a lot of evidence for this. And so what we see is that this voter registration system actually biases the American democracy towards the right. And this isn't a new phenomenon. We've known this has been true for hundreds of years. So voter registration began as a system to exclude people who didn't have property rights, and then it became a system to exclude blacks. And it's currently operating in much the same lines. So it's excluding people that are more mobile. And this is true even amongst politically motivated people. So political interest is not enough to stay motivated, to stay registered to vote. You need something else. And so this might explain America's relatively low support for the welfare state relative to other countries. So it's well known that America has lower voter turnout than other Western democracies. And this is often attributed to our voter registration system. And so what we're doing now is providing this link between the voter registration system, which is lowering turnout, and the voter registration, which is lowering turnout, and also decreasing support for the welfare state. So we think if these people could vote, maybe America would be more liberal.